Hello and welcome to Move the Line, presented by 4for4 Bets. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined here by my three very smart friends to talk NFL draft betting. We are just 2 weeks out. Draft markets are popping up a little bit. We are starting to get into the heavier time. We're starting to feel a little bit more confident here and firing off some of these bets here. So again, Move the Line continue to be your home for all things NFL draft. We will kind of ramp up here in the next couple of weeks too. You'll have more than just the one show per week. We'll start to maybe bring on some other guests, start to do some things more frequently as more information starts to become prevalent in the space here. So joining me here, as always, Colin Allen. What's going on, buddy?
Yeah, it's Masters week. Tailed your Masters bets at Betford's Golf. I know nothing about golf. Also bet on Akshay Bhatia. Shout out to homie. Been crushing since day one. So big fan there, and probably pissing money away on the 100-1, but it's fine. It's for the memes.
Definitely for the brand on the Akshay play for sure. Always here in pockets doing his work, grinding really hard right now. And I really appreciate it because obviously I need someone to carry the water a little bit because I've definitely been in the golf streets more this week and always grinding visits, news, connections. Scott Smith. Scott, what's going on?
Oh, big week this week. UFC 300s this week, so everybody's pumped up about that. Aside from the NFL draft stuff, I'll be releasing a couple of bets today in the Discord for bets and trying to get in on some stuff early, along with some of this draft stuff.
Absolutely love it. Some exciting news since we have last met with our friend here, Vegas Refund. VR is obviously puts together, if you're not familiar with the VR sheets, the draft sheet, you need to go buy the draft sheet. I'll let him tell you more about that, along with some of the other news that has happened since the last time we met. VR, what's going on? Floor is yours.
What's going on?
Sell a little bit, man. Sell. Tell me a little bit. But buy the sheet. Buy the sheet.
Yeah,
buy the subscription.
It's absolutely awesome. It's $35. And then if you want the picks, and I hope there's no confusion here because I know some people are confused about the sheet, including my picks, which they've always been free in the past. Sheet was really just a spot that I kept them organized. But this year, I'm just going to be including all my draft picks for all of these sports on the 4for4 Discord for their subscribers. So excited about that. I gave one play out, I want to say 2 days ago. There might be one or two later today, maybe one, maybe not. Ooh. But I have no idea anything about the Masters. Probably throw a few bullets tomorrow, but yeah, we are all gas on the draft right now.
You gotta have some Masters sweats. So yeah, you want to get all of the draft picks the VR is putting out. Again, they will appear in the sheets, but I promise you those numbers will be long gone. What VR can sway a market very, very, very quickly. So you need the betting subscription to 4for4. Betting subscription is going to take you all the way through the end of next football season. You're going to also, in the meantime, get all of VR's draft bets, not only for the NFL, but he's been a very successful draft better in the NBA. You'll get his, do you do hockey bets, MLB bets?
MLB, I mean, yeah. And honestly, the NBA draft is probably my favorite. One to get involved with the betting. Maybe I'm just salty after the chaos of NFL draft last year, and that could change things. But this NBA draft's actually going to be tough, I think. But it's gross.
Yeah, I mean, I came in 2 days before the NBA draft, just listened to like you, Dane, a couple other people, and like absolutely cleaned up. I mean, it's just like the absolute nuts. So yeah, I totally agree. A lot less talked about. Markets move less. So yeah, NBA draft is great too.
Yeah. So definitely opportunities here to take advantage. So you can use the promo code VR. You must use the promo code VR when signing up, and you will get a discount on the betting subscription. You need the betting subscription as well. The betting sub gets you access to all of 4for4 as well. So if you still play like season-long leagues, you're going to do best ball. This is all inclusive. So promo code VR, 4for4 betting subscription is going to get you a discount and get you access to all that we do. Now you want to get into Discord because Discord is where the official plays will get pushed through. There is a sheet and an article on the site which will capture all of the plays. But again, Discord is going to move so fast by the time they get into the sheets. By the time that happens, they're kind of gone. So take advantage of that. Promo code VR. get in the Discord, link your subscription, and make sure you get in the specific Vegas refund plays chat channel in the Discord. That's where all the official plays will get pushed through as well. And again, you can hang with us all season and get all of those drafts captured there as well. It is the place to be if you are betting on the NFL draft and you are watching the show. You are betting on the NFL draft, or you're at least considering it, and it's where you want to be. So super stoked for that. All right, Connor, I'll let you get started. Obviously, we move on from number one. It's really hard to not start with discussions around number two in every episode. It is the quote unquote where the draft starts drinking game. You can do any content and not say, hey, this is where the draft starts. And we've had a little bit of information, moving markets, 3 quarterbacks for the one spot there with Washington. Kick us off with anything you want to share there, markets, news, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting here that we're hearing a pretty loud drumbeat from both Adam Schefter and Albert Breer regarding the number 2 pick being Jayden Daniels. And obviously both of those 2 names are some of the most trusted, bigger name media people, I think, in the space. But I think it's worth noting that, pretty similar situation here happened with the whole Mac Jones, Trey Lance thing a few years ago. This also happened with Adam Peters being in the same front office. Or being in San Francisco at the time, now in charge of the Washington Commanders. So I believe that they're hearing that it could be Jayden Daniels. I also don't think that anyone really knows. So I would not be betting. We had a question in the chat here. Is Daniels minus 150 a good value, presumably to go number 2 overall? I don't think so, to be honest. I think that we should probably stay liquid. And I think that the day of, or maybe the day before, we'll probably have better ideas. And it kind of reminds me of like last year where, Will Levis was the favorite to be number 2 overall pick at one point. And then the day before the draft, we kind of were like, okay, well, it's going to be CJ Stroud, at the very last minute, basically. And so I would just stay liquid. I don't think that it's really a great spot here. And obviously, if you find out, it's a great, generational wealth, but it's not something that is easily found out here. And I don't even know if we're going to get it. So for me, it's kind of just a stay away at this point.
Yeah. And with Schefter is probably the most connected person in the NFL, of course, but he's also the one that can create the most smoke, the most influence in regards. And it brings me back to probably the greatest bet I've ever hit, probably the greatest bet a lot of people listening, probably some of us have ever hit, which is Paolo. And Waj pumping, what was his name? Jabari to go 1. And yes, they're the most connected people, but for whatever reason, it's just I just don't buy it as much as if someone less mainstream would be bringing the same point up that we knew was connected, like Schrager or someone like that. And it just brings me back to that Paolo Jabari, which unfortunately we don't have Paolo odds on Drake May, but it's just, of course, Schefter is great, but he's just so mainstream that I just don't buy it as much to bet off of it now at laying anything.
Yeah, Scott, I know we kind of sitting and, picking spots in terms of, when do we call in favors on the Washington side or, with any of these situations. Both these guys just referenced, obviously it's the Drake May, Jayden Daniels discussion. We did have some movement a couple of weeks ago where this became a 3-horse race. And is that changed? Is this simply still Daniels or May, or is JJ McCarthy still involved here? Because obviously from a betting standpoint, and FanDuel in particular has floated number 2 overall pick out. McCarthy is 9-1, whereas you're looking at DraftKings is still plus 350. So is it between 2 guys from your vantage point, or what do you want to add to this discussion on 2?
So I think it is. I think it's between May and Daniels. My early lean was towards May. And I think right now the situation, I was actually telling Connor this yesterday. I think right now with as much information's out there, whatever your confirmation bias is towards whichever player, there's enough information out there to make you lean that way and feel comfortable with who the pick's going to be. If you're a Drake May guy, you can go find a handful of people that say that it's going to be Drake May. The issue is that with Jayden Daniels, you have Colin Cowherd screaming from the rooftops that it's going to be Jayden Daniels. I don't put as much faith into Cowherd because Kyle Hurt's not a guy that gets paid to be right. He's a guy that gets paid to have a hot take and be loud. So you have that. The Schefter thing is interesting, but one of the things you pay attention to is the wording with Schefter. He's saying like the belief as of right now, if the pick was today, like there's still 2 weeks. We've had some rumors and some whispers behind the scenes that Jayden Daniels isn't necessarily happy and doesn't necessarily want to go to Washington, to the point where those rumors and whispers have been addressed by his agent. And they've recently come out in the last 2 days saying that he doesn't care where he goes. He just wants to be drafted and get to a team and play. I've reached out to some LSU connections that I have here locally, some people that specifically are involved with NIL deals with players on the team. And somebody close to Jayden's camp said that the meetings with the Patriots have gone better than what they have gone with Washington. They didn't say that he didn't want to go to Washington. They didn't say a number of things, but what they did say is that the vibe was better with the Patriots. So there may be some information there that he wants to go, lean towards the Patriots. I also think there's an outside shot that he wants to get that to that 3 position to have a possibility for the Raiders to come in and give a Cinderella sweetheart deal to possibly move up and him land with AP. There's some other information that came out. He was on Instagram Live with Malik Nabers. They were pumping up Brian Thomas going to the Bills and making a lot of innuendo towards where he's going to end up. I don't think anything is set in stone right now. He's supposed to visit Washington Monday and Tuesday. If something comes out and says that he canceled that visit, or something comes out saying it didn't go well, then I think there will be a window to where things can open up. As far as JJ McCarthy, I just don't think there's enough smoke out there. And when it comes to Drake May in particular, I think there's more smoke to Washington and Minnesota than there is to any other team with some outside interest coming in from the Giants. I think the Giants would be players if May fell into a position for them. But of the teams that I see that are the most interested in May, especially with a lot of the hate and Hackenberg 2.0 talk that he's getting, and Blake Bortles talk that he's getting compared to, I think I just flat out think that Drake May has the most long-term upside when you start comparing his age right now to where Jayden Daniels is at. And I think the Phil Longo connections and some other things with Kingsbury, I just think a lot of the hate in May's direction has been overblown.
And the Instagram Live video with those, like, it was Brian Thomas, Nabers, and Jayden, and there was also a comment. I think Nabers said something like, "You're gonna be playing with like your brother," and then you look in the comments and like, I don't know if they were boys or what, but Keyshawn Boot, which I don't even know if he's still in the Patriots, is played with them last year, and then you see those rumors about Washington meeting going poorly, and it's like, oh, like when his brother Keyshawn Boots on the Pats, there we go. But
so with no bet is kind of the consensus right now. Is there's no, it's all speculative. You probably we would still default, even though we're close, we're 2 weeks out. I think we still are all of the mindset of like your best bet is to leverage long shots, whatever that looks like, versus in certain situations eating chalk, especially in a market right like this at the top of the board where it's so fluid, and we probably will know and have a little bit more information. To be fair, like huge Adam Schefter fan, it's undeniable his connections and how good he is. A couple years ago in the Trayvon Hutchinson draft, still 24 hours out, 48 hours out, there were still tweets coming from Schefter that was a Hutchinson pick, right? So we knew that wasn't the case, but that's still where those, again, there was very leading verbiage to what, Scott is saying. So it's not always that specific. So, you have to kind of watch some of those things and, take your time in jumping in. You'd be okay laying a little bit of juice when we actually know a little bit more versus still being in this minus 150 for speculation. So,
yeah, once you can lay minus infinity in the draft and it's fine. Like
totally different beast. Yeah. Kuiper just put out a 2-round mock that I think is interesting. Kuiper, in the similar sense of Schefter, is obviously an ESPN figurehead, one of the OGs in the draft space. Again, kudos to Kuiper and all that he does. I do think that there is something to that where not that he can get used per se, but because teams know that Kuiper is the most prominent draft guru. If you want to get some information out there, some like smoke season, silly season, lying season type stuff, the best path to do it, to get it out there as quick as possible, is through Mel Kiper. Now, I'm not saying that anything that comes from Kiper isn't connected or valid and that every team lies to him, but sure as hell seems like the easiest way to get some good lies out there, Connor. So I don't know if you've had time to skim. The interesting thing here at the top is he is not mocking a trade at 4. He has the Cardinals staying at 4, taking Marvin Harrison. He has the trade happening with Minnesota moving up to 5 with the Chargers. I know there's a lot of speculation there as well. Obviously, Arizona is a team that has a ton of needs, is in a spot where they could probably still get a key contributor just by moving down a handful of picks, still probably add a top talent at wide receiver and still be able to address a multitude of needs, get them in a situation where they have 3 first-round picks and they can leave with receiver, offensive lineman, and defensive player, or maybe 2 defensive players, whatever they want to do. Any thoughts to some of the early, maybe top 10 plays here in Kuiper's draft, or any takeaways?
Yeah, I guess I had 2 main takeaways here. First off, I think 7 wide receivers went in his mock draft, including both the Xaviers, which I thought was interesting, both Worthy and Leggett, which I think he's one of the first people to have Leggett in the first round. He had him going, in the last pick of the first round. Personally, I'm not buying that, to be honest.
But my first round, he was my 32nd pick in the first mock. Big Xavier Leggett fan. Checking in.
Okay, that was probably like February though, like late. Maybe mid-March.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. So since, I don't know, I'm looking at VR's sheet here. Since 325, there's been like 20 mocks or so, and only one of them has them in the first round, 1 or 2. So that was kind of, I think that stood out to me, but it's notable. Over on receivers is 6.5. I think that is probably still an interesting look on the under, just because I just don't really think one of him or McConkey makes it in at this point. But notable here in the top 10. So something that Adam Schefter said in a recent pod about the Minnesota and Houston deal. So I think when it went down, everyone assumed that Minnesota approached Houston to get an extra first-round pick to use to trade up. But apparently, per Schefter, Houston approached Minnesota to get another mid-round pick to try and trade for someone like Stephon Diggs. And so that's interesting to me, because maybe it means that Minnesota is not the team that trades up. Maybe it's Denver. Maybe it's the Raiders. Or maybe it just means Minnesota isn't willing to give maybe that extra first rounder, because I would bet that the Cardinals are asking for 3 first rounders at this point to get a deal done. So I don't know. I think it made me open my mind a little bit more to it being the 5th overall pick traded instead of the 4th, because again, I'm sure Harbaugh would take a little bit less than the Cardinals, just because if Marvin Harrison Jr. is gone. But I don't know. I thought that was interesting as well, and worth talking about here, because Kuiper also does have 5 being traded. Any thoughts here, VR, on kind of the 4th or 5th pick being traded? Because I think it's putting it's making mocks difficult and putting my brain in a little bit of a pretzel, to be honest.
Yeah, I think figuring out whether, it's really, as long as one of them gets traded, I think it will be okay. And there was that Reddit guy we were talking about yesterday. That I found, which I'm kind of buying him. Which if you go to
Reddit threads are so back. You want to give the intro on that? I feel you got to explain it a little bit. It's
yeah. So I was perusing Reddit yesterday, and there was a Reddit post from a poster who claims to be an NFL scout, and he goes through his a couple takes, and then he starts answering. He goes into a Q&A essentially, and he's anonymous. And we dug a little bit deeper, and we actually kind of figured out who it might be. And I'm not one to buy this, especially on Reddit, but you can really, I feel I have a good sense of context on whether it's legitimate or not. And then you get into his comments, and I kind of got the sense that it was legit. And people that we talked to about it, one comment we got was that scouts are definitely guys that want attention, because their role is really zero credit. They get 0 credit for anything. So they are ones who I can see doing something like this. And 1, he was very strong on Drake May going 2. And then 2, I just totally lost my train of thought.
He wasn't buying the Neighbors over Marvin Harrison Jr. thing.
Yeah, he
either.
wasn't
That was
buying Neighbors over
interesting.
Marvin Harrison. And I don't even know where I was going with this anymore. But he had Drake May going too, a compelling case, and then I don't even know how I got into this.
Are you still hungover from the other night?
Oh my God, I wish we could like clip. I wish this wasn't live. But either way, check it out. It's on Reddit. I wish I could drop the link in the chat. But going back to Kuiper's mock, I think the most notable things he had were Xavier Worthy as the 4th wide receiver. And then he had Cooper DeJean going 16, which after his pro day being so well, you kind of wanted to get an idea on how high he could go. And then the last thing for me is you're starting to see a lot of Brian Thomas to the Bills, who obviously need a wide receiver. And you're seeing Brian Thomas in a lot of mocks going 28. And if you're aware of how like the mock rating system works, you get a lot of points for selecting the player to the team. So if you don't do the trade and he goes 16 or 17 to the Bills, but you mock him 28 to the Bills, you're going to get points for that. And for me, and like this is a whole like I don't even know conspiracy, but like if you think about the year Jamar Chase got drafted, if Brian Thomas's stock to Neighbors is what Justin Jefferson was to Chase, the Vikings traded Diggs to the Bills, then drafted Jefferson. The Bills just traded Diggs to the Texans, and I can totally see them trading into like 16 to get Brian Thomas with the Seahawks, who are I think a prime spot, especially based off of Staten, to trade back, and a team that loves to trade back. That would make a lot of sense to do so. And I think 16 is that sweet spot that it isn't crazy and not too far, that it could be realistic for like the Bills to trade into 16 for Brian Thomas.
Scott, anything you want to add on any of these discussions? And Connor, you can touch on too if you want to come back after and pick up the Reddit thread where VR left off if you have anything to add to that.
Oh, Leggett. That's what it was. Sorry, Scott. It was Leggett. The guy on the Reddit liked Leggett. And also McShay on the Russillo pod yesterday was pumping Leggett up yesterday, which is interesting with Kuiper. But go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Leggett in particular is a guy that everything that I've read on, if you find on Xavier Leggett's like blue cheese. You're on one side of the line or the other. Like you either love him or you hate
Maybe
him.
Let's go.
So it's one of those things. Like he's very polarizing amongst the scouting community, from what I understand. A lot of people, and I think it's a little bit of a lazy comparison when compare him to Deebo Samuel in some ways. And he's definitely a fringe player, but I think it is a bit hot takey to put him there in the first round. But look, it only takes one team to fall in love. Brian Thomas, on the other hand, is from the first pod that we did for this draft season. He's been the guy that I knew was going to end up shooting up boards. I knew he was going to test well, but specifically it's a lot of steam going to Buffalo. I don't know necessarily that it's lazy. Some Buffalo fans have pushed back, specifically saying that they don't think Buffalo has the draft capital to really move up and make any of the plays. They're a little bit low on draft picks for the draft overall, but at the same time, I don't think you can go into the season with as much of a hole needing an alpha at wide receiver as what they have. So I'm particularly buying the steam on Brian Thomas. The one other thing that's interesting to me that I think we can maybe get into, Kuiper had Bo Nix going in the second round, pick 33 to the Giants. You've heard a lot of information. You've heard it straight out of GM's mouth that they don't plan on drafting a quarterback there at 6. That's not to say they couldn't trade up at 4. But there's been a lot of innuendo about specifically what they're going to do at quarterback. And I think the Drake May hype to the Giants is very real. I don't know necessarily that they're as high on JJ McCarthy, but I think if Drake May were to be available to them, they would go ahead and get it. And if he's not, I think they're very much in play to look at getting one of the other 2 quarterbacks in Penix or Nix. But specifically what I've been hearing and banging the drum on is that Bo Nix is a lot higher in the scouting community and in the front office than he is in, the internet and fans and, a lot of the other media publications they have. But the number that I've heard, and I heard that the Patriots in particular looked into Bo Nix, and they were interested in seeing what the possibility was going to be to go ahead and maybe pass on a quarterback in the first round and get Bo Nix there with that pick in the second round. And specifically, what I heard was that the Patriots are of the mindset, that Bo Nix is not going to be available at pick 34. And it's interesting to me that Kuiper seems to have him slotted right here at pick 33. The over and under is at 32.5 on Bo Nix. So I think there is a lot of play for him to go, plus minus within a 5-pick range of here and sneak into the back end of that first round. And we've got a lot of people playing him. You're going to see a lot of mock drafters playing him to Denver at 12, because we talked about the points in the grading scale, and it's not out of the realm that they can actually pick him there. But the other information that I'm hearing specifically with Denver is that they like Latu, so they're actually exploring some trade options to maybe trade down, add a few picks, draft Latu, and then move back up for Bo Nix. So I don't know how you guys are feeling about Bo Nix, but he's one of the guys that's highly interesting to me throughout this draft process.
And when you say teams are higher, you mean like
specifically the front offices value Bo Nix and what he brings to the table, and think that he's a little bit further along as far as being able to start and play games.
Okay, so you think teams like him more than the media?
Correct.
Okay. Where like Bo Nix, and if you listen to the Rosillo pod with McShay, which between McShay and who was the guy from NFL Network that was the Raiders GM? Oh God,
Mike Mayock.
Between losing McShay and Mayock, like God, like those are like two core guys. But I mean, Bo Nix might as well have slept with McShay's wife, as far as I'm concerned, with how like he was basically just bashing him yesterday on the Rosillo pod, claiming it was basically crazy for him to go 12 to the Broncos. And it's honestly, he makes a pretty good case. But for me, like, I just don't see it being realistic whatsoever for Bo Nix to be drafted with the number 12 pick. And to me, that creates a lot of value for the Broncos' first position to be drafted market, which right now quarterback's like minus 145, which leaves cornerback at, I think it's like plus 750, D line's like plus 400, and what's the last one? And then O line is like 14-1, which to me, if the quarterback wasn't so heavily favored, which is Bo Nix, like you would probably cut those three odds in half. And I wouldn't make an argument against any three of those. I personally bet cornerback last week. I don't see anything wrong with either of the other two, specifically with what we've talked about. Like Turner could be there at 12. Like I think that is a prime spot for Byron Murphy. Like there's going to be defensive linemen that I think are projected to go a lot earlier, sitting there for them as well. And at plus 400, which if Bo Nix isn't going, like D line would probably be like plus 150 without Bo Nix.
That's a great point. And I think the playing the, like, if it's not this, then what is it kind of game, and trying to narrow it down is probably pretty helpful, because like you said, there probably will be multiple edge there. If Scott's right and Latu is there, maybe the Falcons, don't take him at 8, or, steam isn't real. Like Denver could maybe consider taking him with his first pick. Corner, I mean, Quinyon Mitchell and Terrion Arnold both probably will be there, both legitimate, contenders. And then O-line, like there's 6 to 7 guys who can go in the top 20 that are all like very viable day one starters on this Denver offensive line. So yeah, I think that's pretty sharp there, especially if you think that they don't go with Bo Nix at 12. I personally still have no idea. And then addressing the Reddit thread real quick, he deleted his account already. So it's kind of like, unfortunately.
I DM'd. I was hoping to get a response.
Yeah, I just checked. Unfortunately, we've lost multiple core members of drafts, draft conspiracies, including Pretty Ricky and anonymous Reddit guy again. So it's sad.
It wasn't hard to figure out who he was, for what it's worth. So
yeah, I mean, it took a couple guys like 5 minutes searching on LinkedIn to figure out who it was. And I mean, he spelled certain words the same way too, that were like a little bit different. So yeah, we figured it out, and the information made sense. No bangers, but I think there could have been more if his account lasted longer than like 24 hours.
I think the thread should still be up though, right?
The thread is still up. Yeah, the thread's still up, but it says like, deleted, like in the parentheses near his name.
Yeah, it's called Scouts Superlatives. If you go on Reddit and look it up, I mean, it's a pretty long thread. It's worth a read. It's interesting. It could be fake, but we don't think.
Just grasping for anything at this point. We touched on this too, and like threading the needle to do what we're talking about here with Denver, to be able to kick the can down the road, still address the quarterback position, but do it in a way where you have to come back in, whether that's at the top of the second round or you're coming back in, the back end of the first round, is difficult to manage. Doesn't mean it can't happen. And again, just because it's something that's talked about all the time, it doesn't always happen. Doesn't mean that it can't happen in this situation, because like nothing's changed. They still don't have a quarterback of interest. And I can't believe that they're going to roll into the season. Now, it doesn't mean that Bo Nix at 12. It doesn't mean that they don't try to get cute and understand, hey, we don't have a ton of capital. So having a way to maybe move back and find a way to make something happen where we're going to add some picks somewhere else, that'd be probably pretty helpful for them to do. It just becomes really, really challenging to get done. The Buffalo stuff too, and I think VR makes a great point. So I think taking that with a grain of salt and understanding the intentionality of mock drafters at times, in doing the Brian Thomas 28 to Buffalo thing seems great. Seems like a great landing spot. Seems like a need met for what they're looking to do, obviously with the roster that they have currently. Just doesn't seem at this point that Brian Thomas is going to stay at 28. Becomes pretty interesting to see what they're able to do and how they're able to maneuver getting up into that spot. Seems really hard for them to get into the top 10 to be able to add one of the other top 3 receivers. But there are discussions around that as well, which I think are pretty interesting. Cooper DeJean has had his pro day, and it went very well since the last time we met here on the show too. And again, just another very interesting name in this midsection here of the draft. When you start to get into whoever's picking at 11, with whatever happens with the trade, we're expecting that to probably not be Minnesota. That becomes a very interesting team. Denver, if it's not quarterback, that's a very tough spot. The Raiders, because they have so many needs. We had the Penix stuff, like that still feels possible. But when you get outside of Penix, they have right tackle needs. They have cornerback needs. They really can do a number of different things. The Colts feel like they could be a team that someone wants to get ahead of if they're looking to get Brian Thomas, because they could go in and do that, though they obviously have some needs defensively, particularly at cornerback. Seattle can go a number of different ways if they stay. It's a very interesting, as we get 2 weeks out, we're like, oh, there's a lot of chalk. We start to agree on a lot of things. There's a lot of consensus growing. And I feel like there's maybe a consensus pool of 25 guys, maybe, but in terms of like the landing spots and what teams specifically do in that range, Scott, is kind of weird. Do you have any thoughts on kind of that range? Anything that you feel better about, or anything that's shifting there over the last couple of weeks?
The one guy that is really, really starting to move up, and it's Graham Barton. I mean, you had him on the outskirts, and then he moved into the back 5 to 7 picks of the draft. And the more and more and longer that this draft process goes, he is a guy that people are linking higher and higher and higher. And I think I touched on before the versatility that he brings. Specifically, when you start looking at it, I feel like Troy Fautanu is just universally mocked to Seattle, but I've started to hear rumblings that Graham Barton's a good fit there for Seattle as well at 16. And, you talked about them maybe being a trade out spot. I could see them maybe trading back a little bit and getting Graham Barton, but I think Graham Barton's a guy that a lot of teams are higher on than what you're seeing in some of the mocks. And I think he's a guy that can be drafted much higher than projected. That is one of those guys that pushes some of these other positions, whether it be defensive end or, some of the edge rushers down the board a little bit. So he's a name specifically that I'm hearing. And then just one of the other things that I want to touch on is specifically, we've been talking about, some trade back possibilities for some of these teams coming back in to get some of these quarterbacks, but I'm getting more and more rumblings for teams wanting to move into the first round to get offensive line. So that's another one that I'm looking at, specifically Washington. I've heard linked heavily to a couple of the tackles that they really want to move back into the first round and get a tackle. So the offensive line market is moving, and I think more and more you look at Kuiper's mock draft that just came out, and he had the right tackle from Washington as going, I think, to the 49ers.
He loves Roger Rosengard or
Yeah,
whatever.
Rosengarten. He's another guy that's kind of been on that fringe, but moving up into the discussion. So I think there's a lot of outs and a lot of movement specifically with offensive line. And I think people need to start digging into how these offensive linemen fit with specific schemes and teams specifically once you start hitting that 12, 13 on down range.
Yeah,
it's a great point. That was brought up in our Discord from our guy RP, I think, today, which I think makes a ton of sense when you start to look at, team needs specifically. Like the offensive line is a need for them, but like Colton Miller's a pretty good left tackle. It's actually really good left tackle. Is one of the only like prominent building blocks on the team. If they're going to go offensive line, they need someone like Oregon State's Fuaga who could play, right tackle. That's probably more of a fit for them than say Fushanu, who is a just classic. He's played like basically his entire career on the left side. So that doesn't really feel like a fit. Same thing with like JC Latham. Like JC Latham is played right tackle. Is he going to play? Does he fit over, say, like a Joe Alt to the Chargers, where Alt's been a left tackle? They have Rashawn Slater. They have a left tackle. So like team specific stuff does, I think, matter a little bit. And there's versatility there too. Obviously Latham can slide inside if you needed him to. It's probably more of a right tackle than a traditional left. Probably can make the same case for Fuaga, for, the kid from Washington. Like there's a bunch of them that I think make a little bit more sense. Is there anything you want to add there, VR?
Yeah. And I think like figuring out the order of the offensive linemen is really just the hardest. It's like the over. We have a bunch of over unders now, and it's like so difficult to have any interest in them because we just really don't know. And like the versatility, and Jeremiah had a podcast a couple of days ago where he was breaking down like the closest prospects in terms of his rankings, and he was speaking to basically he was saying Guyton over Mims because Guyton's more ready with Mims not having as many starts, and a team that a pick like Mims might be more of a luxury. Like I guess he said the Eagles, which I don't agree with in terms of the Eagles taking a luxury pick that's not starting right away, is key. But is it Dane Brugler came out with his beast today, which is it's an insane amount of work, 100 prospects, maybe more, which is his updated rankings. We haven't had an updated rankings from him since February 13th. And the two guys that made the biggest jump, like relatively speaking, close to the first round were Graham Barton and then Fatano. So Fatano went from 19 to 9 and Graham Barton went from 27 to 18. And the most interesting part about that for me was he has Fatano ranked as an offensive guard. Offensive guard 1 is how he ranks him, not as just a lineman in general, which I think was very interesting for teams where he could be a tackle, he could be a guard, slide him to guard, then move him to tackle. Which could come into play for a lot more teams, which is why Graham Barton is so interesting. I don't think Barton gets past like the Dolphins, like at the very, like I think he's a lock to the Eagles if he gets there, but at this point, I don't think he's going to get to them.
Yeah. Anything to add on this, Connor?
No, I think you guys did a good job covering that. I got sucked into, so they just announced that Drake May will be doing his visit to Washington the days after Jayden Daniels. So it's Jayden Daniels next week, Monday, Tuesday. Drake May's late Tuesday into Wednesday. And I think that's kind of like the end there. It looks like JJ McCarthy already did his 30 visit, I believe, with Washington. Again, if that's still even a factor here. So I don't know. I mean, it looks like when Peters was with San Francisco, it was like COVID. So they did like virtual visits with Trey Lance and stuff. So I don't know. There's not really any trends, unfortunately, that we can gather from that, which kind of sucks because there's always like the debate of like, well, is it better to be first because they know you're the guy, or is it better to be last because then you have the last impression, whatever, like, I don't know. I don't think there's a right answer. It probably varies by front office, but yeah, I don't know. It's certainly going to be interesting.
And the other one thing I wanted to mention with Ruger's big board is, and I think this has kind of been a common theme with some recent free agent contracts that have come out with interior linemen having more value in the draft, kind of being considered a premium position now, which of like the biggest movement, 4 of his 5 biggest risers are Chris Jenkins from 66 to 36, Christian Hayes 71 to 47, Marshawn Nealon 51 to 32, basically first round, which DraftKings didn't offer first round odds, and then Braden Fisk from 90 to 71, and then Michael Hall, which 4 of those guys are defensive tackles.
Mhm.
And they all moved up 20 plus slots. Ricky Pearsall was his biggest mover, which I just think is very interesting. There's a bunch of like all 4 of those guys are 5-1 or better to make it into the first round, which has been a common theme, I think, the last couple of weeks of defensive tackles having first round value that might sneak in.
Couple of staying in that bucket there, defensive tackle. Looking also at Kuiper's mock draft, we early in the process had seen a little bit of Darius Robinson from Missouri in the back end of first rounds. He has him 27th to the Cardinals, and more so to me noteworthy is that he has Johnny Newton, who has been. I mean, we did the mock draft using the PFF big board the other day. Newton's a top 10 prospect in their rankings. He has Newton all the way down in his 2-round mock draft, 42 to the Texans. So not only Newton out of the first round comfortably, but having someone else at the position going about 15 picks ahead of him too. And a lot of other guys that we've kind of kicked around that have been in the tail end of a lot of mock drafts. Another guy like Jackson Powers Johnson, who Scott's talked about a lot. Like maybe there are some people that like him a little bit more, but maybe the league is down on him. And again, having more guards, interior offensive linemen, or even other offensive linemen that we haven't really seen in the process be closer to the first round or in the first round is definitely interesting as well. So any thoughts there, Scott? I mean, I know you've been on the JPJ thing, but interested in thoughts on Newton or anything on Robinson as well.
Yeah, specifically Robinson is a guy that has been getting a lot of pump up the boards lately. I think his initial scouting or couch scouting, whatever you want to call it, that pops up on the internet. A lot of people look at him and he doesn't have the speed and explosiveness that some of these other edge rushers do. But the more you dig into the film and some of the scouting reports that I've read talk about how he's more well-rounded and able to set the edge, that he's not just a one-trick pony as far as rushing. So I think his well-roundedness as a prospect is one of the things that's allowing him to kind of move up boards where he's not just pigeonholed into being a pass rusher and can fit multiple schemes. So I think Robinson is a guy who's currently kind of on the outside looking in the first round. You're going to start to see him move into more and more mock drafts here coming up. And I think he has a solid shot to be one of those players that are the last 5 in on the first round. The more and more we get into things. Another guy that's kind of made the move up, and specifically, I mean, he is hot on the top 30 visit circuit right now, is Marshawn Nealon out of Western Michigan. You talk about Dane Brugler. He actually has him as his 32 overall prospect. I've seen him kind of ranked, similarly across other boards as well. But I mean, sitting here tracking my like top 30 visits or 30 visits, whatever they want to call them these days, he is a guy that has been seeing a lot of teams lately, that a lot of teams have interest in. Sometimes when you have a little bit of a small school, I think he's out of the MAC. When you have those guys that haven't played that a lot of Power 5, a lot of the rise ends up coming late, closer to draft time, as people dig in more and more deep into the film.
He's almost visited with every team. He's visited with 15 of 15 teams, which he's only not visited with like 10 teams in the back half. Like it's crazy. And I don't know how much value anyone wants to put into that. When you get to 15, I think it's probably worth something. Yeah, Nealon. When you're seeing his visits, then you see Brugler pop him up as much as he did. Like it's definitely worth something to me.
Are his odds even posted on DraftKings?
They were. They put him up for like a day, and they weren't like. I think it was like 12 to 1 a couple days ago. He was up, which at that point wasn't good enough for me. But kicking myself. And then the one thing I want to Schrager, So I'm a Schrager truther. Have made like a ton of money that I didn't expect to make off of just his stupid tweets. And every year he comes out with like his risers list, which when you see that, those odds are going to get destroyed by whoever. In the last couple of days, he's been pumping Jalen Polk, the wide receiver out of Washington. Shout out to Amiko, and it was 40-1. I want to say a couple of days ago, and like I wasn't not going to bet it. And then last night he put out another tweet. He was like, Jalen Polk is a riser with like 100 R's. And to me, Schrager is all about his victory lap. Like he is not looking for a victory lap on a guy that might be projected like 4th round to go 2nd. Like to me, he's like 1st round or bust for a guy like Schrager. And he wants to throw that victory lap out as that like epic tweet that would get 1 million likes. I think it's crazy like for Jalen Polk to go in the 1st round. To me, if like McConkey is getting love at like 32, why shouldn't Jalen Polk? But I mean, his odds are 25-1, so I couldn't even recommend it now. But if I get another tweet from Schrager, we might have to go about Polk again. We might have to go back in.
Well, 25 is not bad, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tell anyone not to bet 25-1, but you could have had 40.
Yeah, I mean, Kuiper has him as has him behind Jalen McMillan, so he has him as the 3rd Washington receiver off the board, and has a Roman Wilson ahead of him. He has Troy Franklin ahead of him, Malachi Corley ahead of him, some other guys that are just kind of at the tail end. Again, McConkey, Pearsall, like he's got him pretty buried comparatively in terms of Keon Coleman. All these other guys going in the 2nd round ahead of him. So definitely interesting. I mean,
it's Schrager's
25-1.
Hits. Like usually his risers hit like guys that you're not expecting, and he always reminds you after, which of course, totally valid. But like that's why like I don't think a guy like he's not pumping a guy to go in the 2nd round. Like that's just not like who cares.
And one other thing with Schrager is that he's been a little bit more quiet this draft season than what he has been in past seasons. So I know they've got some changes going on there at the NFL Network, but
yeah, I feel like it has to be that. Last year he blamed it on like having another kid.
Yep.
But his
they're moving, right? They're
moving
moving
really late.
They're moving East Coast, West Coast, so it's it's not nothing. Be interested to see how things kind of come out here in the next couple of weeks. Connor, is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to kind of go around the horn and give you guys each a shot? Something we didn't touch on, or a player, or a draft market, or anything that's popped up? Because we've had some over-unders, and it's still tough because like some of these things are book specific still, and they're not like widely available at every book. But yeah, just the floor is yours, Connor. Anything you want to touch on?
Yeah, Caesars dropped a bunch. DraftKings dropped like, I don't know, half the amount that Caesars did. Caesars is now sending a lot of stuff to review, which sucks. Before they were just taking, 500 a pop and not really saying anything about it. But should still be able to get a decent amount down there. Something I did want to talk about though, is staying in the 1st round market. DraftKings now is allowing you to parlay them, which is kind of interesting because I think there's a few guys that are, going to be like early 20s, late teens instead of, like fringe 1st rounders. Because I think in my opinion, you don't really want to be parlaying guys like, Darius Robinson with like, Lad McConkey or anything like that. Like that just doesn't make sense because those are 2 guys that are going to be fighting for like literally the last 2 spots pretty much, But I think guys like Graham Barton, Tyler Guyton, Chop Robinson, and AD Mitchell, those are all guys who are like minus 600 above. I think I'm, very comfortably in my mind, and for most mocks, like that's minus 147 for all those 4 guys. So, and obviously I think Nate Wiggins, I mean, his hype has gotten, pretty steep. Some people are a little bit concerned because of the size. And I think, you brought up some good points about that, but, like the most recent reports are like that his stock's trending up. I mean, some people are even saying that he could, rise above Quinton Mitchell, which I'm 100% not buying, but, I think is noteworthy that other people were saying that. So he's like minus 800 to be a 1st round pick. Again, all that's like minus 112 if you put those guys together. I don't think that's bad putting it all together. I'm not someone who's going to be laying individually minus 600, but I think all these guys are, 25, 26 or higher instead of like the last, 6, 7 picks.
I would throw like something about Wiggins I just have a bad feeling about too. And like Schefter on the ETR pod yesterday the only nugget he gave was Odunze Mitchell's going to go a lot earlier than where he's being projected, which Wiggins is like minus 800 and Odunze is like minus 600.
Yep.
But I'm more interested in like the parlay in the top 10. And the angle that I was like playing around with yesterday, these are just for fun. Like, was Albert Breer speaking to how he sees 3 offensive linemen going in the top 10, which there's 7 that could realistically. And my gut, like, I have a gut feeling that Latham might be one. But if you just do like alt with Fuaga, Latham, and maybe like throw in like a Quinyon Mitchell to maybe the Falcons, but like you don't want to cancel because you got the Falcons with like, if you use the Falcons and use like Mitchell first or Latu, and then throw in an offensive lineman, maybe like Fatano to the Jets, like those can get fun in terms of odds, which alt is minus 800. So he would be one of the 3 that's not going to really, I think it bumps it up like 100 if you throw him in. Like the parlay odds aren't real either. But
I'll wait for FanDuel to get involved too. Like when FanDuel lets us parlay stuff there. DraftKings is predatory at this point. Like I get some Masters fume going inside with me with DraftKings and put this market out that I thought was awesome, and they like just wouldn't take anything. It was one of those like you reached your limit. They don't tell you what the limit is. And like, yeah, just mad. I'm just mad. So yeah, FanDuel hopefully will get in there soon. It's just one of those things like you've done any hung out with us at all. Like Connor's not typically advising 5 and 6 leg parlays very often, but draft season is a little different, right? Because you start to understand, where these guys are going when they are pretty safe to be, drafted inside the top 20 or inside the top 25. You feel pretty good adding a minus 600 leg to a parlay and in an information market. It's totally different than, an outcome that has to actually be played out on the field. So yeah, it's like, look at these donkeys giving out 6 leg parlays. It's like, draft season is different, baby. It's different.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like Fezzik gets a ton of, shit on Twitter for like the minus 4,000 Purdue money line tweet from last year in the first round that he sent out. Like he legit tweeted like, I'm betting Purdue minus 4,000 first round. And obviously Purdue lost in the first round last year. I mean, like the draft's just different because no game has to be played. Like Rome Odunze is going to be a top 10 pick. So, I mean, he's minus 1,600, but like, it's like 100%. Like, I mean, Rome Odunze would literally have to have like a life-changing injury in the next 2 weeks for him not to be a top 10 pick. And so again, like parlaying that with, something else, I don't think is a bad look. And especially, maybe a Odunze and like Verse or Latu, something like that. Like, I don't know. I'm going to play around with it. Maybe there's 2 like plus money one guys that like under certain scenarios. Cause I think that we all collectively are starting to get a little bit spicier with our 7 through 10, I guess, in the back part of the top 10, just based on some of the things we're hearing. So, we released plays in the Discord on picks 8 and 9 yesterday, and I think there's still some value there on those. So, again, not going to tell the free listeners. You can go find that in our Discord, but I do think there's some interesting outcomes there that I'm going to play around with here on the top 10.
Yeah, subscribe to the betting sub, promo code VR. Get all the plays. Scott, floor is yours. Anything that you want to touch on here that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, one of the markets that I think is interesting right now, that I think has some value is you've been seeing Dallas Turner and hearing some stuff about Dallas Turner possibly not being that first defensive player off the board. I think DraftKings and a couple of other bookmakers have some interest in line on some alternate players. Specifically here in New Orleans, we've kind of talked about it and beat a dead horse to a standpoint of it makes no sense for them to draft anything other than an offensive lineman. But the rumors and two of the players that you're hearing down here is specifically Jared Verse is a player that they're very interested in here down in New Orleans, and possibly Brian Thomas. I think Brian Thomas would be a little bit of a luxury pick for them compared to what they need along the offense and defensive line, but it's not necessarily set in stone that they're going with offensive line. And Jared Verse or possibly another, if Dallas Turner is not that first defensive player off the board, he's a player that they could also be interested in along the defensive line looking at edge.
Like, I think of like the 3 edge guys, like whether it's Latu, Turner, or Verse, if like they don't go 8 or like maybe 12, like they can really fall
Yeah.
far.
No, that's a good point. What else do you want to touch on VR to wrap us up?
I think that's pretty much it. Mims and Bowers have, I don't know if they're private workouts or just a pro day, but they have workouts today that are a pretty big deal, specifically Mims, where Bowers is pretty much, you know, what you're getting with him. If anything, he could, I guess, raise his stock, but Mims is going to be big.
Yeah. We got a little question here from Scott. Work got in the way. He wants to know about Mims 22.5. His family's food budget has been spent on the under at 23 and 22.5. So kind of in that range where it makes a ton of sense. There's, Philly's in that range. Just ahead of that is Miami. You have Pittsburgh at 20, which makes a ton of sense as well. It's been a team that's been talked about, obviously, with Roger Jones last year out of Ohio State, just kind of bookend big dogs. Scott, any thoughts there on Mims in this range, 22, 23.5?
Yeah, VR hit on it. I think there's going to be a big representation amongst multiple teams there today to see him work out. His range is all over the place. A lot of people like his athleticism and his size, but then you start to look at it, I think he only played like 9 games. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati would be the two teams that make the most sense there, as far as what I've heard him being linked to. Pittsburgh being the most prominent, but he's also getting a lot of steam to a team like Green Bay. So that 22.5 line, you have a few outs, but his range is much wider than that. Going past that pick 22 range, I could see him, falling all the way in the back 5 to 7 picks as well with some of the other players that are moving up. I think while he's athletic, I think he is another player that may be pigeonholed to playing the right tackle and maybe only being a right tackle. As far as him playing left tackle, it's going to take a lot of development at the NFL level before I think teams trust, him protecting the blind side of starting quarterbacks. But 22.5 is a little bit stiff. I don't know what the odds he got on it, but it's one of the ones I would like to think that Pittsburgh's out, but there's a little bit of variance and a wide range for Mims.
Yeah, I mean, not to be alarming, Scott, but I mean, I think, I guess Scott D and Scott Smith, not to alarm you, Scott D, but I think Scott Smith is saying that you should start stocking up on ramen and PB&Js, just in case, because
for what's worth, I would never bet that over. Like, I would not. Yeah, it would only be an under for me. The only issue is kind of Graham Barton getting pumped up the board might be taking a Mims slot to like the Steelers, but I would never bet the over on that.
And Scott's point about right tackle versus left tackle probably takes Miami off the page for Mims, being that in Miami with Tua, right tackle is protecting the blind side. So that is essentially the left tackle position for all intents and purposes in Miami. So obviously they have Teron Armstead there as well, if he can stay on the field. So they would need more of a right tackle, and that becomes a important position. Miami has more needs, I think, in the interior, and that's kind of another spot where Barton makes a lot of sense if he were to fall too. So,
and one other rumor that might give you an extra out is that San Francisco has been interested in possibly moving up for an offensive lineman in particular, but whether that's right tackle or interior remains to be seen. I think they have a little bit more need at interior, but that's another team that could possibly move up into that mid range and take an offensive lineman.
Yeah, San Francisco's another tough one. Offensive line, interior defensive line, cornerback. I think all of those are very much in play at San Francisco. So we have to see how the board falls to them at 31 and what they do there. Jeff, just a great question. As always, Jeff. Hard Rock, plus 125 odds on the first kicker to be drafted in the 5th round. Personally feels like that's 4 rounds too low. Jeff, big kicker prop guy. Just absolutely plugged into to the kickers, thinks that it should be one in round 1. Does not have the stones to name a kicker in round 1 here, which is also classic Jeff. Just hedging out and not having the actual balls to put someone out there. But yeah, Jeff, obviously getting plus money on anything kicker wise, you should probably get in there. So I've not been grinding kicker data at this point. So I did love a play last year. I think I had Rams first pick kicker at 20 or something like that, because they needed one and they didn't have a first pick until the 3rd or something round. So yeah, last one, Daniels.
Will
ahead.
Reichard, kicker from Alabama, with a 5th round grade on Dan Brugler's Beast. So that's
Okay.
the only one that is within that range. There's no big name like kicker like there's been in the last few years. That would be the biggest one that leaves you probably one out.
Hard Rock, also a Florida thing, which also definitely checks out. Jeff is definitely a Florida man.
It's in New Jersey.
Is it? Okay. Well, also checks out. So it could be one of those two for sure. We touched this at the top here, and Drew mentions A's Daniels at -150, good value. No, not right now.
But it can be. Like today,
Sure.
no. Tomorrow,
Right.
could 100% be amazing value.
We're doing the
I'm
show.
saving- I'm saving my one phone call.
Yep. Let's go. Would Schrager mocking Daniels tomorrow? I think his first mock comes out next week, something like that. Usually a week out, I think, maybe around there. Would him mocking Daniels change it? I think that would make me considerably more interested in Daniels at 2.
I feel I'm probably on the outside. I'm 65-35 leaning in direction of May right now at this point. There's been a lot of smoke with Daniels, but if Schrager came out, I would have to
I
go
still have
change
no
my underwear.
interest. Like I could care less. Like who goes? Like yeah, I'm a Patriots fan, and it's just like I don't think I would just bet the plus money one at this point because we really don't know. I mean, the Reddit scout says Drake, so let's go, and Scott says Drake, so.
Schrager suggested a 2 from yesterday. I mean, it's just not happening. I just don't like what.
I mean, it's just like the dominoes effect of the top 3. Like, I don't think it really whether it's 4 trades out or 5 trades out, it's still going to be the same 5 guys that go in the top 5, I believe, which is good. Like, as long as a Levis doesn't happen, which I feel like everyone's a little bit more gun shy. It probably shouldn't be. Because a Levis scenario, really, when was the last time that happened? But
quarterback is so unique too. We've touched on that. Like you can have they fall, but it's like if they don't go early, it's the same thing with Knicks, right? And Knicks in play at 12, we can disagree with the player take and whatever, but in play at 12 for sure. But then also in play at 33. You know what I mean? It just is a totally different beast. So quarterback is its own little island. So all right, gents, good stuff as always. And remind folks to subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast, wherever you're consuming this content. You want all of the plays that the 4 of us are making on the draft. You need to get into our Discord at 4for4. To do that, you need a betting subscription. You can use promo code VR to take advantage of a discount to get in there. Again, you will get all of VR's draft bets on the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball, all coming up in the next handful of months. And the betting subscription also takes you through all of next football season. So all that we're doing on there. So take advantage. Promo code VR, betting subscription at 4for4. And we will be back soon. We'll kind of figure out a schedule for the next couple of weeks and probably turn up the heat here as more information becomes available and more people want to talk draft and more information is there for you guys to share. So for Connor, VR, and Scott, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time.